In this week's Parsha, Parshas Pinchas, we read Seder Nachalois, the Seder of Yerusha. Ben lifnei bas, sons come before daughters, daughters before parents. Chas v'sholem, if a person passes away and his parents are still alive. Parents before brothers, Seder Nachalois. And on one hand, we learn in Shabbos, in Bava Basa, Kuf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, Asur lahavir nachala. Hakoisev nachosev la'acherim veheniach ezbonav ein ruach chachomim noicha heimeno. If a person writes part of his inheritance, part of what he possesses to others, and not to the proper Yorishim, that's not the right thing to do. The Lashon of the Mishnah, ruach chachomim noicha heimeno, seems to indicate that it's not an Aved, it's not an Isra, it's just not the right thing to do. The spirit of Chachamim is not favorable if a person gives away part of his inheritance to others. But the Rashbam on the spot, Kuf Lamed Gimel above Abasa, Chuvas Arash as well, Klal Pei Hey Simen Gimel, it is not only unfavorable, it's a prohibition. But people write Savois, and we encourage them to do so. If you decided to not just adhere to Mishpat HaTorah, and you want to give your daughters like you want to give your sons, then write a valid halachic tzavor. L'chorah, that goes against the Isser of Havoras Nachala. HaKoisev Nechosav La'acherim V'heniach Ezbonav. And avodas nachal is a prohibition even amongst your children. You should not go against Yerushas HaTorah. So how do we recommend this practice and encourage it if it's wrong, if it's transgression and avera? So the halacha of avodas nachal is halacha pshuto. Rambam Perek Vav Hilchas Nachalois halacha Yud Aleph Choshe Mishpat Reish Pei Beis Sif Aleph. But l'chorah, there are 5 sugyas, starting from the Mishnah, Gemara, Poiskim, Minhagim, that all contradict the din, the Isur of Havoras Nachala. Let's start off with the Mishnah, Bava Basa Kuf Lamed Amud Aleph, Nachla de Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike was one of the greatest Tanoim, and he's medayek from the Pasuk, V'hoyil b'yoyim hanchilo ezbonov. So let me just give a very brief explanation of what is the din of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike is machadish. You could give preference to one son over the others, one daughter out of the other daughters, one brother out of all your brothers. But you cannot, you don't have the authority to give a daughter b'mokum sheyesh bonim, to give a brother b'mokum sheyesh bonos. But amongst the group that are fitting to be Yerush, you could prefer one over the other. But when you prefer one over the other, l'chorah you're ma'avir nachalo. Question number 1. Question number 2, mitzvah l'kayim divrei hameis. That's a sugya Gittin Yud Gimel and many other sources in Shas. Mitzvah l'kayim divrei hameis says, even if the mace just said a tzavor bal peh, he didn't even write up a will. But the Yorishim are expected, required, it is demanded of them to uphold his world and do exactly what he wanted. So in Minchas Osh I discussed this sugya, Parshas V'yechi, Minchas Osh Bereshis, and I think there are 2 simonim of Minchas Osh and Gittin about this sugya. And I brought most of the poskim maintain it's a din derabanan. But this goes against Havoras Nachala. Question number 3, when a person lies on his deathbed and he's afraid he's going to die, his tzavor is valid, even though they made no kinyan. And that is at the Kona Shaloi Torah Da'atoi. We are afraid he is in such terrible stress. Could you imagine? A person knows that he is dying, that his time is limited, he's at the end of his line, and he is such a fragile mental psychological stress, such a fragile state. Shelo yitorav da'ato, yitiknu chachomim, dvorav kiksum v'chimsurin. That goes against Havoras Nachalo. He doesn't want just to leave it up to Din Torah. No, he has what to say. He wants to be Machalik Nachosov in a different way. Is that a prohibition? Would Chazal be Metakan Atakono, which is Be'etzem and Issa? So in Safek Kerem Chaimar, Rabbi Avrom Ankaveh was one of the Gedolim in Morocco. Sefer came out somewhat more than 100 years ago. In Simon Pei Daled he writes, "Vayevi matnesh chimera the Rav or Chachmeui or the Beis need to come to the sick person and they need to give him Musa. You're over an avoras nachalo." To me, that is so unreasonable. Is there any greater tiruf hadas than the Rav coming to this nebuchadnezzar person and saying, "You're an awful person. You're doing an avera"? I think it would be better not to be metakal matnesh chimera keisum echasurin and not have this awful experience of the Rav giving him Musa and, on the other hand, accepting what he says and validating it. This seems to be a tarta nesata. This minig is found in many svorim in Gedolei Sfarad, especially Gedolei Morocco. And Reb Avrom Ankaveh is not the only one. I want to quote about 5 or 6 different sources. Shalas Etshuvis Eidos Biankov Zamakuf Chov Daled, Reb Yankov Bardugo, Sefer Mishpat Tzoko Biankov Chelak Aleph Semen Shin Chov Tes, Vayoyme Yitzchok Chelak Beisim and Pei Daled, Mishpotim Yeshorim, Reb Rafor Bardugo, Chelak Beis Kuf Samach Aleph, Toya Foyser Eim. There are several svarim with this name. I'm speaking about one of the Sephardi Gedolim. So Toya Foyser Eim, Chelak Beis Semen, Chelak Aleph Semen Amid Beis, and Chelek Beis, Simen Yud Zayin. They all bring this minhag, but the interpretation of this minhag is different, and we find 3 different reasons why the Rav must be there. First of all, we need testimony. We need clarity that the Shchim Merab was in a proper state of mind. Datoi miusheves olav. And when he wrote what he wrote, or he asked what to be done with his nechosim, he was stable mental functions. Second reason is that he wasn't under pressure from family members, that they didn't coerce him and pressure him to give L'Ploini and not to give L'Almoini. Reason number 3, to verify that there is no avoras nachlo abureach santa. Not to give him Musa that he's over Aveda, but really to clarify what are the conditions in which it is legitimate and when is it not legitimate. But let me bring 2 more sources that l'chayre contradict the Yisr of Avoras Nachala, Tzavoa Machayim. So a person that wants to write a will, it is strongly recommended he writes a halachic will, because the civil wills are not really valid at Pialocha. At Pialocha, one person cannot influence Yerusha at all. So a halachic tzavoa, a halachic will, is one that is based on shuachas lifnei misosi, as if he is machalak nechosav while he is still alive, and he can do that al pi halacha. And the Ramo quotes the concept of a halachic will in Choshe Mishpot, Reish Nun Zayin Siv Zayin. If it is an Aveda of Avoras Nachla, the Ramo wouldn't clarify and he wouldn't write it and he wouldn't recommend it. For the past 600 years, there's a minhag in Keilas Ashkenaz, Chashtar Chatzi Zochar, and people write for their daughters 50% of what their sons will get. The first sources of Shtar Chatzi Zochar are Tshuvas Mari Mintz, Tshuvas Maharshal, Nachlas Shiva, more than 500 years ago. 200 years ago, we find Shtar Zochar Sholem, Ktsoy Sachoshen, the Chsam Sofer from his first father-in-law, got a Shtar Zochar Sholem. From Rabbi Kiva Eger Zivug Sheni, he got Chotzi Zochar. But this is a minig vasikin. We do not find this minig in Sephardi communities. All the sources I quoted are Ashkenazim. But Reb Chaim Palagi, going back 200 years to Turkey, Reb Chaim Palagi and Sefer Chukas Chaim quotes Miyamei Mahari Basan. Mahari Basan was one of the Gedolos Farad in Italy going back 500 years. And Reb Chaim Paraji says from the days of Mahari Basan, the minhag is to give girls 10% of what the boys will get. So obviously, the Ashkenazi Gedolim were kinder to the girls than the Sephardi's, because minhag Ashkenaz was to give 50%, maybe even 100%. Reb Chaim Paraji writes, in the Sephardic units they gave 10%. Aval ben kach u ben kach. L'choyre, this minhag goes against the Isser of Abureach Santa. That is why I have a very firm opinion, and I know what I say now sounds like a chiddush. Libi yoyim alish is a emes, and many times I say, when my heart talks to me, I usually listen carefully. Usually he does not talk devorim b'teilem, and in this case as well. But when I am a chaddush, a big chiddush, I always feel more comfortable to find sources, b'divrei Rabbeinu, Rishonim and Achronim, to prove my point and to give it more validity. So what is the gedank? What's the rayon? What is the idea? Lani is daiti. There is no Isser of Aburach Santa only when there is no real justification. It is just you don't like one of them and you like others. You like a stranger more than you like your own children. That is illegitimate. That is not right, and that is the Isser of Aburach Santa. So the Lashon of the Mishnah is HaKoisev Nechosav Lacherim Veheniach Ezbonov Ein Ruach HaChomem Noiche Himeno. HaKoisev Nechosav Lacherim goes without saying Heniach Ezbonov. You can't give a gift to Ploini and leave it with Almoni as well. If you gave this away to others, obviously it's on the expense of your children. So why does the Mishnah need to say HaKoisev Nechosav Lacherim Veheniach Ezbonov? And the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch quote the same Lashon. The Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch that I quoted before. What is this dual language? Why is there a need to say Heniach Ezbonov, Heniach Yoshim? To me, Chazal mean to stress, it is only against halacha because the essence of what you're doing is you're giving Reuven because you don't want to give Shimon. You're giving Sarah because you don't want to give to Rachel, Rivka, and Leah. That is the Isser. And that is why Chazal stress, but if there is a reason, which is logical, which is decent, which is justified, to give one and not the others, that is not an Isser of Havoras Nachala. And that is why the Gemara and all the poskim speak about Havoras Nachala, because the Isser is only transferring. It is only, instead of giving Reuven, you're giving Shimon. HaKoisev Nechosav Lacherim Veheniach Ezbonov. We find very early sources that say we could learn halachas from the Rambam, not only from what he actually writes la halacha, but also from the Seder, Mugdam ve'Ma'ucha, the way the Rambam brings sugyas together. So Perek Vav Halacha Yud Aleph, Halacha Yud Beis is the Isser of Avoras Nachla. Halacha Yud Gimel, the Rambam brings Shabbos Yud Amid Beis. La'olam lo yeshana Adam ben abonim. B'shvil shnei Sela Milois, Nizgalglu Advoram, V'yordu Aviseinu LeMitzrayim. Chazal criticized Yaakov Avinu for giving Yosef a tzaddik the Ksoinis Pasam. And Chazal say, because of the few dollars that the Ksoinis Pasam cost, our forefathers went to Golas Mitzrayim. That's the story of Yosef and the brothers. So Chazal say, La'olam lo yeshan od ben abonim. The Rambam brings this halacha together with Avoras Nachala. So this proves my point. These two halachas are the same in essence. You can't show more affection to one child than to another. So the Isser of Avoras Nachla is only when it's obvious, when it's evident that the kavana of the parent, of the father is, I want to give Reuven and I don't want to give Shimon. Either because I hate Shimon or because I love Reuven. Ben kach u ben kach, it's not right. Lo yeshan odam ben abonim. And that is also the essence of the Avera of Havoras Nachama. I think this makes so much sense. And the proof is all the kashas we asked. But I also did find 3 very important sources. Shalosh Teshuvas Bnei Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda Ayash, who was one of the Choshevs to Sephardi Poskim. And he clearly writes in Simenun Gimel, the Yisr of Avoras Nachla is only when it comes from a negative place, from a bad place. Metoch Evo Vesino. In my opinion, Lav Davka, Metoch Ahavo is the same. You cannot give one more than the others, either because you love this one or because you're against that one, you don't love that one. But if there's a justified, practical reasoning why to give one more than the other, there is no Issa. And we find the same Chiddush in V'Yosef Avraham, Simen Yud Gimel. He was one of the Rabbanim in Chalb in Syria. And he writes, the Yisr is only when it's out of Kas, not when it's out of Rachamim. And I said before, any reason to give Ploini more than Almoini, if it is justified, if it's logical, there is no Issa of Havoras Nachala. I quoted the Bnei Yehuda, V'Yom Avram, and there's a special importance to the coming quote, coming source. The Marsham was the Poisek Ador in his day and age, going back 100 years. A phenomenon that is unique to the Marsham. To the best of my memory and recollection, I think all the Tshuvas of Marsham are written only to Rabbonim, Dayonim, Avos Botei Din, Moira Hoiroa, and not to simpletons, to Amcho Beis Yisrael. Why is that? I'm sure the Marsham got questions from everybody, just as I do. But his time was so limited and in such high demand that obviously decided I'm only going to answer Rabbonim, because a tshuva to a Rav would affect not only one person, one family, maybe hundreds. So the Marsham wrote a tzavoah, and the nusach of the tzavoah is printed in the introduction to Sefer Tcheles Mordechai, Sefer of the Marsham Ala Torah, Drushim. And we find the tzavoah in the Aragdoma. And in the tzavoah he writes that his son Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak, should be the Moitzer Apoel, the executioner of his will. And he should divide up the money, Lefira Oiseinov. And that is against the Burei Achsanta. Why didn't the Marsham specify in his will what everybody should get? I could only guess and assume. Things might change. They might change. When I say, when it's justified to redivide the tzavoah, what I mean is, and this is a question I had many times, a person has 3 sons, 2 are well-to-do, business people, they have a lot of money, they have very few children, and his son number 3 sits in Koilel, he has 12 kids. He didn't even marry off one of them. And the father would like to give son number 3 more than 1 too. He has more needs. He is in a desperate condition. His older 2 sons are doing business. They're doing just fine. Compact families, a lot of money. But his 3rd son is struggling. Would that be an Isser of Aburei Chasanta? I don't think so. Because it's justified. It's logical. That is not the Isser of Aburei Chasanta. Kach nera l'choira. And the fundamental question would always be, is there an objective reason you want to give Ploini more than Almoini? If there is, that is not an Issa of Aburei Chasanta. Kach nir'a poshut be'enai. But there's a Gemara that dashes everything I said today, and it contradicts every word, and that is Ksubis Nun Beis Omid Beis. The Gemara explains Ksubis Ben Induchrin. A husband writes to his wife in the Ksubah, if you die during my lifetime, all the money you brought in, the Nedunya, all the money you brought to me, even though Al Pi Halacha Ba'al Yorish Ishto, everything would go over to the husband, and from him to all his children. But Chachamim Metaken, that the husband writes to the wife, Ksin benin dichron, de heaven chiminoi, in yorsen achasayich. Whatever you brought in to our marriage, your children will get the Yerusha, and not my children from other wives. And the Gemara asks, that is a Burech Santa. How would that be legitimate? How would he take what he rightfully is Yorush as a Baal, and his children are Yorush from him? So why would that not be considered a Burech Santa? This Lechera proves, even though he has a legitimate reason, an objective reason, it's still a Burech Santa. But I say no, that is exactly what the Gemara answers on this question. So the Gemara brings the posuk. Give your daughters to prospective husbands. Es beloseichem titnu labonim. How? How could a father guarantee that somebody will want to marry his daughter? So the Gemara says, Harbo alei amoya. If you're going to give a big nadunya, then you have a very good chance you're going to get a very good chassan. So the Gemara says, because a person is obliged and he's supposed to do whatever within his power to find good chassanim for his daughters, and therefore that is the spirit of Torah, and there is no isser of a burech santa. And my question is, the posuk has been a sechem tit rabbanon is not in Torah's Moshe. It's in Nevi'im. How would that justify an avera of a burech santa? So maybe that is the kavanah of the teretz. There is no isser of a borech santa when there is an objective reason why to give one more than you give to the others. And that is not a borech santa. And that is exactly what the Gemara means when the Gemara says, it is a mitzvah, kedei sheyikpatz odom v'yiten lebitoi kibinoi. And that is why the Gemara asks, that's a borech santa. Is it right to give his daughter like he gives his son? And the Gemara says it's right, because otherwise you'll have difficulty finding a shidduch. But how is it matter and issa? So my interpretation would be exactly like we explained today. A burech santa, when it's logical, when it's necessary, when it doesn't mean making one happier than the others, there is no isser of a burech santa. So that would be my understanding in the teretz of the Gemara. So this is a Yesod Godel B'Yenai, and this is what I paskan halacha l'maisa. There is no isser of a burech santa when it's objectively right and reasonable and practical. In that case, there is no issa of havoras nachalo. And I try to explain how I reached this conclusion. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen Heishev es chamosi me'al b'nei Yisrael b'kanes kanosi v'sechem v'lo chelisi es b'nei Yisrael b'kinosi. There's a vort, maybe a vertel from the Satmar Rebbe, the Heilige Divrei Yoel. He said, how come the story of Pinchas is in Parshas Balak, and the reward that Pinchas gets is in Parshas Pinchas? So the Satmar Rebbe said, before we give rewards and praise and compliments to a Kanai, we should clearly examine his motives and his intentions. Interesting. That is why we wait a week. And this vertel was expressed by the greatest kanoi of our time. That was the Satmar Rebbe. On one hand, he was a kanoi she'en kemoisei, but he was Amoid HaChesed, one of the greatest Balei Chesed in this generation. So, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, it's not easy to be a kanai. You need to have pure intentions. If kanoas comes from kas, then it is worthless. Kanoas must come from chemla. Pinchas was concerned about midas adin, And that is why the Torah says, Hey Shives Chamosi Me'al B'nei Sol B'kanes Kanosi V'Seichem V'Lechirisi Sebzor Al Kein Hinini Noisen Loi Zbrisi Sholem Bedin Hu Sheyitel Sachoroi. The din of Kinnis Pinchas Aboy Ramas Kanoam Poigam Boy is a Mishnah said in Pei Aleph Amid Beis. And Rashi says, Kanoam Poigam Boy B'nei Odom Aksheram Amiskanim Kinnis Amokoim. So Rashi seems to explain, Kanoam Poigam Boy is not just anyone. Needs to be a Odom Godel, and you need to have pure kavanas and intentions. In Igros Moshe, there's a fascinating truth that Moshe wrote to his son-in-law, Rabbi Moshe Shizgal, who was a Godel B'Yisod. He passed away very young in the lifetime of Rabbi Moshe. And Rav Shizgal asked his great Shver, does it actually mean to say there's a condition? Not everybody is entitled to destroy a Boyer Aramis? Doesn't need to be B'nei Odom Aksheira B'Amaskanim Kinnis Hashem Tzavos Kinnis Hamokim. And Rav Moshe says, of course. And I want to prove Rav Moshe right from the Chidush Haran. So another story, another shtickle Gemara in Sanhedrin Pei Beis. Pinchas comes to Moshe Rabbeinu. Didn't you teach us Haboy Laramis Kanon Poigamoy? And Rav Moshe says, of course I did. Karyane de Igarte Iu Leheva Paravanka. You're the one that brought the letter. You should be the executioner. Go ahead, do it. And Pinchas does it. Chidush Haran explains, what is Pinchas asking Moshe? Did he forget? Does he want to make sure? No. Chidush Haran's interpretation is, Pinchas asks Moshe, am I ra'ui to be a kanai? And Moshe says, go ahead. Ein adam ra'ui mimcha. So we learn from the Chidush Haran, Pinchas asked for two discussions. Could I rise to the challenge? Am I fitting to be defined as Bnei Odom Aksheram Ameskanim Kinas Amokim? And Moshe says, yes, you are. So it's not easy to be a kanoi. Kanoas should have nothing to do with anger, with frustration. Only mitmidas arachamim. And the intention of a kanai needs to be lo hoshav chaymo. So Sanhedrin Pei Beis Amid Beis, there's another Gemara. Kishabo Pinchas lakana eskinas Hashem bikshu malach hashoros ledorchav. The angels wanted to push him away. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu hanichu lo kanai ben kanayu meishav chemo ben meishav chemo. Why did the angels want to push him away? Why do they intervene? What is it your business? Shabbos Yud Beis, we learned that the angels are not boichanei kaloyes valev. They don't know our machshavas. They don't know our thoughts. So the angels weren't convinced that Pinchas is ra'ui liot kanai, that he's such a big tzaddik. That's why they wanted to push him away, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says no. What exactly does HaKadosh Baruch Hu say? Kanai ben kanayu, meishav chemo ben meishav chemo. He's not only a kanai, fundamentally he's a meishav chemo. And therefore, yes, he is entitled to go ahead and kill Cosby and Zimri ben Solo. Not easy to be a kanai. One of the examples of a kanai is in Brochas Daf Chof. And that is a conversation with Rav Papa and Abaye, two great Amiron. One asks the other, Ma'ishnu Rishonim desrachash lo nisa v'anan lo yisrachash lo nisa. Our forebears, our forefathers, there was Zerchet the miracles, and we no longer. We are greater Lamdonim than they were. So what merit did they have that there was Zerchet the Nisim? And the answer is, Rishonim de Maslan Afshara Kedushas Hashem. And that is why there was Zerchet the miracles. In the days of Rav Yehuda, there was a drought. He took off one shoe, even before he had time to take off the other shoe. Yordu Geshovim. Vanan tzavchine v'tzavchine v'leis demashkech ban. It's all about Mesiros Nefesh, Maslan Afshara Kedushas Hashem. And Chazal bring an example of a great kanai, Rav Ada bar Ahava. Rav Ada bar Ahava calls her b'shukot, and he sees a woman that is dressed not modestly, total lack of tznius. Walks over to that lady and tears her dress. And then onlookers say, what's wrong with you? She isn't Jewish. She isn't Jewish. And Rav Ada bar Ahava is disturbed. and he regrets. And he asks the woman, what's your name? And she says, Mosan. And he says, Mosan is like Mosayim. Mosan. $400 took out of his pocket and he paid her. And I ask, why does the Gemara bring this story? The Gemara brings an example of a kanai, a person that's moisa nafsher lekaddish Shem Shemayim. The Kiddush Shem Shemayim ends when he tears that garment. What happened later? How does that fit into the story of a kanai, mekadesh Shem? And I say, of course it does. So Rav Ada bar Ahava walked out on the street one nice morning. He sees a lady that is awfully dressed. He walks over. He tears that beggar to shreds. So what? We need to know, who was this Rav Ada bar Ahava? How did he act in the morning before he left his house? Did he scream at his wife because the coffee was 2 minutes late and then he went to Shiur? Did he fight with the gabbai because he didn't give him an aliyah? If that's the case, then he goes out on the street and starts harassing women. That's not a kanai that we need to admire. That is not a kanai whom in his merit we are zoichet to miracles. We need to know, who is this Rav Ada bar Ahava? You want to know who he is? Then just listen what happened, the end of the story. He was told she's not Jewish. I know some people, if they would be told she's not Jewish, they would say, Zolzana Kapora, and they would just run away. But that's not the Rav Ada bar Ahava. Yes, she was dressed in an awful manner, but she's not Jewish. It's not my responsibility. She doesn't have our mitzvahs. She doesn't have our level of modesty, of tznius. So he asks her, what's your name? And that's astonishing. Al tar b'sicho misho. Beishto yomru kal v'choyme b'yeshes acherem. B'bas yisor kal v'choyme l'goyim. B'rishus yochad omru kal v'choyme b'shus arabim. Beish tznuah omru kal v'choyme ben benoshel kal v'choyme beishu that's not tznuah. The God Ladosh shouldn't be conversing with her in the middle of the street. But Rav Ada bar Ahava says, but I hurt her. And I had no justification to hurt her feelings and to embarrass her and to insult her. So he asks her, what's your name? And when she says Mos, and he takes $400 and he gives it to her, he would be entitled to say, we need an evaluation. We need to go to a store. Where did you buy this dress? How much did it cost you? And take into account you've been wearing this dress. It's used. It's a used garment. How many years have you been wearing this dress? No. He doesn't make inquiries. He doesn't argue. He doesn't even ask questions. Mosa, Dalad Meyazuza, he takes out $400. That's Rav Ada bar Ahava. He wasn't an angry person. He was the nicest person in the world. His kanoas has nothing to do with kanas. It has to do with Kiddush Hashem. B'nei Odom haksherem hamiskanim kinas amokim. And that is the only kanoas that's beautiful. That was the kanoas of the Satmar Rebbe, who was a ish rachamim, a ish chemelo, a person of tremendous midas, and he was the greatest kanai. That was Kinas Pinchas. Rav Ada bar Ahava asked him, Masechet Tanis in Yerushalmi b'meher achtu yomim. He had a very long life. And towards the end of his life, he was asked, what merit did you be Zerach L'Arichas Yomim? And you know what he says? Mi yomai lo yekpadati b'torch beisi. How many people do you know could say, Mi yomai lo yekpadati b'torch beisi? I never raised my voice. I was never angry at my wife or even at my children. And that is the Rav Ada bar Ahava, the Mosa Nafshay Kedushas Hashem. So in Sanhedrin Pei Beis, and it's quoted by Rashi in the very tchil of the Parshat. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Why does the Torah give the yichus of Pinchas? Lefi sheshvot hamoyim avazan oisoi. Haraitem ben puti zeh shepitam avi imoy agolem le'avodah zorah v'harag nasi shevet mi Yisrael. Lefichach ba'akosav yichsoi achrei Aaron. Does the Torah need to write things mahoitzi belibon shel amei arotzois? Bad people. Why is it relevant that his grandfather was an oived avodah zorah? What does that have to do with him? That is why the Torah needs to write Ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Yes, So my understanding is the Shvatim didn't just say silly, stupid, foolish, aggravating things. No. They said, Pita mavi imoy agoram avodah zorah. Because Shabbos Kufei Yom Beis, the Gemara says, Kol HaMeshabeh Kelem B'Chamosoi, Yeh Beinecho Ko'oived Avodah Zorah. And the Zohar says, Kol HaKoyes Kilu Oived Avodah Zorah. So the Shvatim said, don't be so inspired, don't be so inspired from the Kanos of Pinchas. He's an angry man. This is who he is. His grandfather, Pitam Agolam L'Avodah Zorah, it's in his genes, because Kas and Avodah Zorah are closely related. So it's no wonder the grandfather was an Oived Avodah Zorah, and he's an angry man. He's not only Mishabek Kelem B'Chamosoi, he kills people B'Chamosoi. Lefichoch Bo HaKosav, V'yichasoi Acharei Aaron. Shvatim, dear Shvatim, you're right, it's in his genes, but if mixed, you have the wrong genes. It's not that Zayda, it's the other one. It's not the one Shepitam Agoram L'Avodah Zorah. The genes of Pinchas are Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKoyen. Aaron HaKoyen, Oyev Sholem, Roidev Sholem, Oyev Esabriyas Umakav HaTorah. That's the personality of Pinchas. That's who Pinchas is. And his Kenos is pure. Kula L'Shem Shemayim. Meishav Chemo ben Meishav Chemo. Sheikhel Kenu Amoim, we should always be Zoicha to be Kanoim mitoch Chemlo, mitoch Ahavo, out of love and warmth for Klal Yisrael. Shenishme v'nesbasa b'soirei stoivis, we should be Zoicha b'korav l'bias Moshiach Tzidkenu, b'mheiro v'yomeinu, amen.